we've had all these amazing actors in Australia who have gone on.
Yeah, Hugh Jackman, Eric Bana, Jeffrey Rush, Kate Blanchett, Judy Davis. The list just goes on, and I'm forgetting a few. Guy Pearce, whatever. I think one of the biggest shames in our country is we don't celebrate our talent readily enough. I mean, Charles Chauvel in the 1950s, he started basically Australia's... There was a hope with him that Australia was going to become a massive industry.
Jeddah. Think about Jeddah, the first time we actually had a real Aboriginal person rather than as a motif.
And it was an epic film with incredible cinematography, and it was the first, I think one of the first films that tackled the relationship between European Australia and the native Aborigines.
Yeah, because I mean really, we've spent so much time looking at the British versus Australia, so we've always got these dichotomies, but they're much more about civilization versus the bush or whatever, and he really took for the first time that notion of real people and did something that was, I think, groundbreaking.
And you know, I think he kind of set the trend with Australian, kind of the new wave in the 1960s and 70s with Australian filmmakers who made a lot of films about the European contrast to the great southern and haunting and very ancient land that this Australia
I mean, speaking of ancient, my favourite film was Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Picnic at Hanging Rock.
What I loved about that was, you know, we've got two monoliths. We've got that cathedral-like Aboriginal sacred site with Hanging Rock, and then we've got this antiquated school, and what I loved was how they kept looking at British sensibilities and the ridiculous way they dressed compared to the Australian outback. And what I loved about what Weir did was he made it so haunting
so
and that
eerie.
slow motion,
the music,
dreamy, hallucinatory stuff.
I still remember how it goes.
And Joan Lindsay, you know when it was cut off and it's like all Peter Weir films, more questions than answers, but she had some notes about how the ending was supposed to be, but it was still a mystery. She wanted the notion that the girls and the teacher had followed a snake through a crevice into a hole, and by following the snake they disappeared. And the last little girl, Irma, who was following them, the hole closed over before Irma could go with them. So that whole notion of the Pied Piper, right? So I thought Weir was very clever in picking up on the Pied Piper, the Pan Pipe.
They even made references to famous Italian paintings like the
Pre-Raphaelite,
Angel,
absolutely. And all that. And they spent so long trying to find the girls who actually matched some of those images, and I think they did a fantastic job. What I loved about it was just going with that whole feel of here we are in the Australian outback, and it is mysterious and it is pioneering into the unknown, and so there was a sense of the fascination that people then began to have. And it's interesting because Peter Weir loved yawl, and he was always interested in archetype, and the thing about the Australian archetype, you know, those larrikin...
The last wave.
Yep, the larrikin men,
and
they're always so, you know, don't say too much, go out on the adventures, create a new possibility. It's sort of like our story of the Wild West of America.
That, and the way the central character, the protagonists, are portrayed as intelligent people who feel as though, or I suppose, behave as though they understand the greater things around them, and then nature comes knocking on their door.
And that whole thing about Richard Chamberlain as the lawyer,
blew my mind.
That's so in that notion of other people from other countries, very in their head, and really Australia's so much about heart. And we can't understand. It's interesting because we are shot all of that at 12 o'clock every day. That's what he did to get the amazing feeling. And in the film,
And
everyone's clock stopped at 12, which was interesting because that was the best time for the light when he took the film, and it gave you that feeling. So I think it was very clever the way he interspersed a lot of his experiences personally into how he shot the film.
Most of the most famous Australian films were shot like in the outback and man against nature, and I just love how that's very unique with Australia.
Well, it's this whole thing about space. What is it about Australia? Australia's about space, but it's also about a whole.
There's just so much uninhabited space.
And other countries, every other country you go to, there's a middle, like, you know, the market square, the town square, the square. When we're about circle and going around in that sense of, if you like, you know, the mandala or the circle, which is about the unconscious. Oh, thank you. Yum, beautiful.
So hungry.
Enjoy.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. But I loved the fact that what makes Australia different is that we did have that sense of having that sense of space and aloneness, because you can go into your unconscious, you can go into that reflexive space about yourself, whereas you look at other films, they're so frenetic with people and things, and you don't really have that solitude that can take you into that space.
I'm telling you, it's something that is very Australian. It's something that's very unique to our filmmaking culture, and I think it's something that needs to be celebrated. Like I pointed out, we had a filmmaker, I think I spoke about this before, with Richard Franklin. He was one of Australia's most amazing filmmakers, and he was kind of like Hitchcock's protege. He was known as the Australian Hitchcock. He made this one movie with Jamie Lee Curtis and Stacey Keach, which was often the case with 70s and 80s.
Have to have an American actor
to lift the bar, to attract crowds, because Australia was just struggling.
And for a country so small, so many amazing people, but
amazing. But as soon as they make it, they get the hell out of this country, and they make incredible films overseas, particularly in Hollywood. Peter Weir, Bruce Beresford, Philip Noyce, Fred Shapisi, they've all done so well overseas, and they've never looked back. Often, quite a lot of the actors and directors do come and they live here, but their business and their filmmaking is always abroad. And even Baz Luhrmann and, you know, some of the more contemporary filmmakers, which is quite sad. And there needs to be that concentration, that hub, that initiation to really create the right culture and I suppose evolve a strong industry here. Because Australia has the talent. It has everything.
Look, what I love about Australia, we make the quirkiest films.
Yeah.
And we've got these really odd archetypes, and there is something quite bizarre about the way we write films. And
have you seen Road Games? It is brilliant. I mean, Stacey Keach plays this truck driver moving cargo from city to city, and he takes on a job from Melbourne to Perth. A really long drive, as you can imagine. How many K is that? That's like what? 3,000 K? I don't know. Very, very long. And along his travels, he meets a backpacker, Jamie Lee Curtis. Two Americans on an Australian highway. How unlikely is that? But while they're driving, they uncover this mystery regarding this car driver who they keep overtaking and being overtaken by along the road. A lot like Duel. Have you seen Duel by Steven Spielberg?
Just that real suspense.
That suspense, but this time it's reversed. The truck driver is the investigator, and the one in the car, the smaller car, is the one that may have a sinister intention. Don't want to spoil anything. You must watch the movie.
That juxtaposition of evil and good is good, and that does remind me. Remember John Jarratt in Picnic at Hanging Rock? And then you think about what he did in Wolf Creek.
Oh.